Good morning, afternoon, lunchtime, wherever you are and checking in today. Welcome to Danish and Coffee. And Kevin, an episode kind now. We have a few of them. It's the 22nd today, and we have company today. I will come back to that in a second because this is actually, and welcome to you all from where you are listening, seeing now, seeing later. We have around 160 people registered for today that each are watching now, or we will send it out to you afterwards also. This Today is one of those that I have looked forward to for a long time. Nigel and Wayne, you are here also. You will come back with some introduction because coming from Denmark, just coming home yesterday from an area I took to Manchester, I had some visit over there, guys. And then we have spoken a lot about vulnerabilities for the last 2 years. I understand it. I get it. I think it's amazing that you actually do concept around that word in the UK. I was visiting London, Kevin and Nigel and Wayne. I'm used to be in London City and Manchester, and I was out in that area in London, a working class city, and I was out in the evening walking around, speaking with people. I could just see a city that has been changed over the last year. There was a lot of people who struggled there. The city also looked like it struggled there. So for me, that was like quite an eye-opener to see something that I normally just talk about and hear about, but coming down and see it real life was quite struggling. How the environment was out there. Welcome to the show today, and maybe that was a good start for you to take over, Kevin. That it's not just a word; it's actually happening.
I think the key to what you just said is the lived experience, which, I think one of the things that was great, and Nigel and Wayne will talk about this in a minute, but the Vulnerability Registration Service had its conference on the 7th of May in Nottingham, and a gathering of over 200 people, regulators, and a lot of practitioners. And I think, Nigel, there it was very evident, whether it be the Alzheimer's choir, specialist area of vulnerability to other areas like gambling, loan sharks and the like. There are a number of problems that become particularly acute when there's a cost of living crisis on, in which, everybody's forecasting this is going to get worse. Ofgem, made it very clear that we're in for a few shocks in Q3. So, yeah. Nigel, I don't know if you want to kick us off with a little bit of background in you founding VRS, but what your takings from the conference were. I mean, in particular, the launch of the Vulnerability Passport with Wayne at Smarter Contracts.
Yeah, thanks. I must thank you for Martin and Kevin for inviting me to the Danish coffee, and it was well overdue actually. We're getting the timing right, but no, I mean myself for 45 years in financial services. Originally from a lending background, collection background, and in 2013 went into a debt purchase background. But I think, always like to think we were a little bit ahead of a time, myself and my late brother. And we just found it quite distressing because we always sat on the shop floor that, we was always doing the right thing by a vulnerable consumer, making sure that we point them in the right direction. It's standard information that you should be passing through. But then we thought, well, why is there somewhere that's not available, i.e. it's not much different than a CRA that people can check to see if this person is vulnerable and just deal with them the right way rather than explaining it 20 times. And that's how the VRS was born, actually, because we thought, well, something needs to be done. And it's been a long journey. We're 10 years plus in now. And I think what with the regulator bringing in more details around vulnerability, I think people now, as I always say, they're actually not just talking about it now, they're actually physically embedding it into the systems, which is what they need to do. But from the VRS conference, it was a great conference. Like you say, Kevin, we had the regulators there and obviously the ICO, which was very important because the conference was really, it was key to people to understand that there is no issues with data sharing. Data can be shared. I mean, that was clearly explained by Andrew Thompson from the ICO, and it is for the greater good of that vulnerable customer. And I think that put a lot of people's thoughts from businesses where we have had them conversations numerous times about, GDPR, we don't think we can share the data. I think that clearly put that to bed.
I think what was very interesting there is, although we talked about a lot of vulnerabilities, one of the key things, I think now you've got 1 million+ records there, is identifying the fact that many of the consumers or firms registering on their behalf, multiple vulnerabilities are very prevalent, and that makes some of the risks of detriment, if you don't get it right, much more acute. So I think that came through very clearly, Nigel.
Yeah, I mean, we all our stats clearly show that on average people are selecting 5 flags. I mean, when people have financial difficulty, there will be other consequences that come in with that, whether that's mental health. There are other things that drop down from there. And it's the way the VRS works. We don't just actually tell you on the flag, but we're also telling you what is the consumers actually telling you for the actual what they're actually looking for from what they're telling you. So with the outcomes that we have in there now, you've got that full journey. And yeah, I mean, some of the stats that we are will be coming out with in the next quarter newsletter as well. I mean, yeah, it's definitely making a big difference.
One of the things, Nigel, that I think is impressive also, and it's important in this discussion, is also, is about customers and in that situation that is often where they are in debt, they have other kind of issues that lead to being in debt, etc. That becomes stigmatized. Yeah, it's very stigmatized service. Often it's stigmatized to talk about it, and that maybe lead down to a special extra guest that we brought in today that nobody knows why we brought in today, but we brought Wayne in today also because Kevin has been talking about, you have been talking about, I have been talking about stigmatization and how do you remove that. And one thing is not, I'm always saying, why should the client, that's why they don't want to speak with humans sometimes, because they need to tell the same things over and over and over again, right, and expose themselves for something that is actually uncomfortable to talk about. Maybe, Wayne, a short introduction to who are you and what you
Wayne and Nigel have been, I think the press announcement was November last year, Wayne, I think it was, in the initial relationship. And I think the conference just crystallized that and gave you the opportunity to showcase several of the services that you've been working on. So some of this has been going on for some while. I think it's very, very impressive, but I'll let you try and explain in layman's terms some of the stuff that you delivered at the conference.
Yeah, thanks a lot for inviting me to chat about it. So the conference for us was great, and it was amazing to see the engagement on the day and what's followed since, which has been unprecedented really in terms of the demand that we're now seeing. So for the past, I suppose, half a decade, what we've been building is the infrastructure that solves the challenges that businesses are faced with when it comes to sharing data across networks. So a lot of people look at data sharing as something you do with one other person, but in a smart data economy, sharing data is more a network-led proposition than it is just one-to-one. And so what we've built is the infrastructure that powers that data sharing across networks by allowing permissions to travel with the data. So everybody that gets the data knows what they shouldn't do with it in real time. And it's auditable across the chain, so everybody knows what they shouldn't do. And after building that protocol, what we've now started to build on top are the first consumer applications on top of that infrastructure. It's an application called Pulse Plus, and it allows individuals and businesses to create passports of data that they can then share as many times as they wish to do so. And they can do that either themselves or they can delegate that to a trusted third party who can share that data on their behalf. And what really transforms the way that we share data through this infrastructure is that rather than the passport moving without the permissions travel with the data. So everybody knows what they can and can't do with it, whether that's an agent or whether that's a human. And for us, whilst we're building this, frankly, game-changing tech, like the team that have built it, I'm so proud of them. It's great what they've built. What we saw in the market was amazing sets of data that solve real challenges for human beings. And the one that we have always wanted to solve for has been vulnerability. And, Nigel and the team will attest that I've been badgering them for the best part of 5 years to work with smarter contracts because we see the value of what the technology offers to their, data set and for the customers whose data that it is. And so what we've now provided people with the ability to do is create the first vulnerability passport, which they can share with a third party over and over again with permission, in full control of that data. So that's what we've launched. That's what we've been building, Nigel, isn't it, in the background? And our teams combined have really put something together which is yeah, I think something that we're all really proud of, and we're certainly capturing the imagination of businesses. So that's the first part. That's consumer-led data sharing. So it's my passport. The other problem that we solved as well is around enterprise-led data sharing. So, to the point that Nigel was talking about, which is, can we share the data? Whilst the regulators are suggesting that you can, there'll always be, well, what about this and what about that permission? There's granularity of permissions, and can I share it for these purposes? Always that stickiness or concern. What we've now built is the vulnerability alert service, and that alert service allows enterprises to share their data with a bank or a utilities provider without the data moving. So we can essentially match the data between two organizations so that everybody knows the vulnerable customers exist. Yeah. Is everybody all right? Seems like there's been a technical issue here, so yeah.
I can hear you fine, actually.
Technical issue. I think Kevin looked out.
Yeah. Everybody dropped
back,
out.
Kevin?
Yeah, but that's it. It's like enterprise data sharing. So essentially, a bank can run their data set. They can run inference against VRS's data set without actually having to share the data set with VRS. So it just means that it's privacy by design. There's no batch files being sent across emails or, however it may be being sent. They can just run the inference in their environment and they can get the results that they want, which is they get an update that customer 133,500 is registered as vulnerable. These are vulnerability codes, and these are the permissions that you've got to use the data. So the free flowing of data sharing is now available at scale for this data set.
I love it, Wayne. And we had a little technical outreach, so I think Kevin he's coming into the studio again. I love that, and it leads me down to just in general, Wayne and Nigel, about that whole data sharing and that route that we are going on here. For me, I'm a big advocate for it. I believe, and we have talked for a long time, is actually about having these solutions. Is one time that the clients don't need to, that is a more smoother customer journey, but it's also about if you actually use this commercial and understand your clients, you would be able to engage better with them from the beginning. So there's multiple ways why this makes sense. And because a lot of clients are moving to also AI solutions, it become even more critical to understand. Kevin, I was over and visited Daniel over in Digital DRA here the other day in Halifax, and some of the thoughts we are, when people are coming into a self-service portal, they have been very good at data. They also work with you, Nigel, I think, but they have been very good with optimizing, understanding if a client was potential vulnerable before they come into any journey. And then the journey will be tailored for that person, which I find as the best way to go that direction of understanding client and how you should be using it. Let's talk a little bit, guys, about vulnerability as a word in itself, because one thing that I was met with a long time ago is, what does that actually mean to be vulnerable? What is that actually? Because it's not just a word, it's multiple things under that. You could be vulnerable because you got divorced, you could be having mental health problems and other things. How do you use it, and how do you see that word becoming more used for commercial purpose also, if you understand the subtitle, so and say, under it?
I think one of the things here I think we'll start off with is in terms of what are you vulnerable to and what support needs you have. And I think, Nigel, if you start with your good self, that's one of the big evolutions with VRS really over the last 18 months is mapping those support needs. What does that mean in practical terms, notably around how people want to be communicated to?
Yeah, exactly, Kevin. We've got just over 35 flags now in the system, and although we always had flags, we had numerous organisations saying, "Well, we've got the flags. What do we actually do with it when we receive it?" Which was, I was thinking, well, okay, so we took the horse to the water. How do we tell him how to drink it? So that's an expression always used, and so what we did, we spent over 12 months after that, then said, okay, let's look at the outcomes. We spoke to a lot of organisations, in their professional capacity when we looked at the flags, and there's roughly 5 to 6 outcomes per flag. But that, if you look at what people are selecting, You know, it really is been a game changer. About people are actually just saying, well, this is how I want to be communicated in. I need larger brow, or I need my partner, or I need a person because I'm mental health. I need them communicating on my behalf. It's very simple things they're asking for, but it's like anything, you know, you need to be proactive and use that information. They're registering themselves on the VRS for a reason, so they don't have to repeat that same story 20 times. But you need to be proactive and use a service which has that information there. You know, I think that come out of the conference as well. You know, you need to be proactive, not reactive. But yes, I mean, and that will build. I mean, we have been obviously talking to all the utilities, water, energy, telcos, and everyone. We have the capacity to be able to integrate with all services, especially with the alert and monitoring service that's been is there now with smarter contracts and Wayne. You know, there is no reason why all organisations can't work together for the greater good and use the information in the correct way.
I think the big thing, Martin, that you've covered in and we've covered in previous sessions here, trust is paramount. And so, I think the stuff that Wayne's talking about, if we bring Wayne back into this, the fundamental challenge I see, and I raised it in the Tell Us 20 report webinar last week, is if creditors and others aren't accessing this information and we don't make it easy for them to do that, consumers will lose trust, because they'll turn around and say, I've told these organizations, I've registered with the Priority Service register with VRS, and yet these firms I work with regularly don't check it. And I think we've got to start overcoming some of those barriers. That part of that may be cost, part of that may be technology. I'm hoping Wayne's going to say that, you know, we've cured part of that, which is creating sort of evergreen, relatively easy plug and play technology. Wayne, hopefully I haven't put any words in your mouth there. You're on mute.
Oh, you're on mute, Wayne. Sorry. You're on mute.
Wayne, you're on mute. That's the good thing with live shows, Wayne.
Sorry. You're absolutely right, Kevin. So in terms of the technology that's powering data sharing today, it isn't fit for purpose in the world that we're now moving to. That is just the reality. And you know, the system is not built for vulnerable people. That's the reality of things. So if we look at data sharing today in some, like, for example, open banking, the data drop-off rate when you have to reconsent for your data to be shared is between 40 and 60%. And I can guarantee that the statistics of that, they're more akin to people who are not vulnerable. I would imagine most of those stats, you know, large majority are focused on data sharing for people who do have capacity, who know how to use their mobile phone, who kind of know, you know, what the journey is and what's required. So if you then translate that to I'm vulnerable and I've got these same challenges, these same points of friction with the technology, you know, the data drop-off rate's probably going to go even greater. And so what that means is that's economic loss. Those data drop-off rates is economic loss for the business, for the individual, for the UK economy as a whole. Data sharing is fraught with friction. And that has really been the thing that's driven smarter contracts for the past, you know, 7 years, is how do we remove that friction? How do we make the experience much better for the end user? And, you know, what we've got today in terms of a user...
Are you by any chance?
What's that, sorry?
You're not going for the job of Chancellor at the moment, are you? With your...
It's definitely not my role.
Wayne, it's not to interrupt you, Wayne, but you say, I love what you're saying there. It's music in my ear when you say less friction points and you are mentioning drop-off rates, etc. It's precisely what this is all about. Even that, and if you are, I'm not vulnerable, let's say it right, but so I have more patience. I can go through different kind of things. When you are in that situation, it become, you don't have that, you know, that's too, it can be easily too much. So that's why you create those friction points and you have high drop off. Oh, I need to tell it again. I cannot manage again to do that. It's the same when you have a people coming into a call center and an AI call, where what we are talking about, Wayne and Nigel, is also about, but when we go through that process, if we can already know what the client have in their vulnerability passport they want to share, we would know already, we would understand the client before before it actually comes to that, oh, we know that you have X, Y, Z, we can bring you down that creates what I love more that you said is it financially, it makes super sense to do it, because the other way that you are not using it and handling it is creating a different situation.
So Wayne, here's your challenge along with Nigel. So Nigel's talked about something that I've done training work with Nigel on before. You get a hit, somebody says they've got dyslexia. What are you going to do differently in your service part of it? So within your passport, what is the art of the possible, particularly when we relate that to front end people dealing with the customers on the telephone, so humans, but also potentially one of Martin's bots. You know, it could be Oscar the bot. How do we use that passport effectively, using some of the information that's in VRS, maybe the priority service register where there are support needs, but ultimately help an agent work with that customer who's given you some top tips on how they want to be dealt with?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the passports are designed to be shared in 3 ways: in person, over the phone, and via an API. So we kind of remove a lot of the friction from every type of experience that the individual might have. In terms of how the passport can be shared, it can be shared to a human or an agent. So, you know, we're already talking about agent to agent transfers with permissions. So that's one of the biggest friction points that exist today. It's like, how do people know that agent can take the data and just give me the output? All of those things are very on point today. So the passport facilitates that. So if you think about Martin, Mega AI, you know, what you've got there are a number of agents that can take the individual on a journey based on their vulnerability. So on that first call or second call, for example, when you've got the passport set up, you can just give the agent that passport, and that agent knows how to provide good care, good outcomes for that individual, without having to go through the stress of having to disclose to either a recording or a human who can't quite understand what they're meant to do. In terms of the actual interface itself, it's an ever evolving application, and Smarter Contracts is by no means, we're not experts in vulnerability. We want to work with the market. We want input from best in class, which is why we work with VRS, why we're talking to you, why we're talking to Mega AI, why we're talking to others. The interface that we have is going to be absolutely customizable based on the individual. It will solve 70%, but then there'll be 30% where there's difference for the individual in terms of the journey and the end solution that they need. And we're actively working on a couple of additions to close that gap on 30%, so that when people are using it, it becomes easier and easier and easier for them and their carers, more importantly as well, for them to be able to use it alongside them. So it's designed in such a way that we can't, you know, the individual is in full control of their data. When we talk about vulnerability, recognize it can move paycheck to paycheck, so people can fall in and out of it. So you want them to be able to take the control of the data back at the time that they're able to. And this application does that. It's not one or the other. It's a very,
It's a very 2 seconds. It's a very good point also, because I remember a long time when then you mark a step that you are now vulnerable for this reason, etc. That's fine. Things have the tendency to change. So if I was divorced tomorrow, I would be vulnerable for X amount of period. Then probably would so that the availability to change where I am now, what is my situation now, and that updated data will then lead you into now handle that customer where that customer is in his or her life right now. So that makes you, Kevin, a little notch over to, that's also what we are doing, not this one, but with IE Hub, where you have an income and expense, where that is like, why do customer need to fill it out every time? No, because we now have these IE Hubs marks back and saying there is an income and expense, it's already fulfilled 80%. You need to make X, Y, Z question to optimize it or update it again. The same here with your solution, and all of those are coming in to make less friction for the client and a better customer experience.
It raises an interesting question there, Martin, because the creditor or the firm, it could be an insurance firm using the data, they will have their own data. So I was interviewing Chris Fitch last week. I was meant to do the interviewing, but it felt in the end like he was asking me questions. But one of the things there, Wayne and Nigel, was that you got the passport. It can be used as a sort of one-time pad. but the creditor themselves have got to leave some footprint on their system, a record to say they spoke to that individual. And in the event, worst case, it turns into a complaint, they've got to maintain their own record and use some of that data on it. So what's your view with regards to getting that balance right with regard to data minimization and all the other stuff that's come in with the DUAA, that you got a passport, it's there, it's under control, consumers, but the creditor at the end of the day has got to take something out of it and say, right, I've got to leave a footprint on my CRM system.
So, Nigel, do you want me to answer that, or
yeah, if you start off, Wayne, and then I've got some thoughts. But
so, in terms of the passport, the passport provides an audit trail of who's had access to the data. So it's part of the passport. So the journeys that it's taken, regardless of who's actually shared that data, will have a full audit trail of where that's gone to. And so the passport itself can be, when you share it over the phone, that data just gets pushed through. So whatever's on that passport, and I think this is the key thing, it's like when we talk about the vulnerability passport, we're talking not just about the vulnerability flags, what their vulnerability is. This passport allows for other providers like IE Hub, as an example, to provide information within that vulnerability passport that can then be onboarded into the third party. So when I share my vulnerability, I'm sharing my vulnerability story, not just the origin of the vulnerability, whether it's financial distress or anything like that. It's the ongoing management of my vulnerability and the service that I need. And so, for companies like Mega AI, who are, maybe working on the collection side and they need to provide service to the end user, to the same point, Martin, you don't want to redisclose your vulnerability. You also don't want to redisclose your income and expenditure, because if just disclosing your vulnerability is frustrating and stressful,
yes,
doing a I&E is even more stressful. That's really difficult, and the answers may change from client to client because your capacity to remember and it's really difficult. So you want to do it once and you want that to be shared. So this passport facilitates the sharing of all of it. And that information will have to fall into the system of the company, like Mega AI or whoever, to deal with that individual, and there'll be a record of it. The difference is that we'll be given the permissions around how that data can be used with the information as well. So if they try and use it for any other purpose, which is not permitted by the individual when it was granted via us or via VRS, we'll be able to audit that. So it's about making sure the data is used for the right purpose at the right time, and the individual can revoke access to it as and whenever they choose to.
It's amazing. It's amazing with these things coming up and how we are beginning to using that data. We have 3 minutes left, Nigel. Some few comments from you, and then.
And just a quick one, when we was talking about how that data is used, it's got to be stored in the CRM in the correct way, because obviously what the regulator is looking for now, they are looking for, well, do show me how you manage to produce the best outcome for that consumer. When you're going to need to bring out your regulatory reports and everything, it's got to be in the CRM. But also the customer in the VRS, they do have the right to delete their data at some point as well. They have access through the portal. But it's very important that we've noticed this in the portal that 30% of people are coming back in and changing flags. I mean, for instance, you talked about bereavement earlier, Martin. That is. I mean, some people, they might want to be left on the VRS for 6 months. Some people maybe a year. It affects people in all different ways. But there was a key quote that Alison Waters used at the VRS conference, which is, we talk about all organisations, IE Hub, VRS, all organisations, how they can pull together. And I just think her quote where she said, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. And that's and I just think that's really stuck in my head. And that is what we're talking about here today, how Mega AI is linked with the VRS, and then obviously what with the digital passport now, how we're working together to get that, we talk about less friction for that vulnerable customer. So I think it's great the way that the technology, due to what smart contract have done of Wayne, you know, I really think we took this to a complete different level.
The good thing is we have been doing something about it. We have been talking in years, this industry. Now it comes into solution that will be benefiting the clients. My last work, and then Kevin, probably, I would just say, I like that everybody's talking about vulnerability also, but out of regulations and etc. I think that's, of course, something on top of people's mind. Just want to refer back for my last word for today before I say goodbye, and Kevin has one. Johnny Simpson said one more time, to understand your customer consumer portfolio, the best way is to understand their vulnerabilities. For me, that's a key thing still. Understand them, work on that, you will succeed more. Any last word, Kevin?
Yeah, so we've only scratched the surface today, so I'm sure we'll come back to this. I've put the link on the relationship between smarter contracts and VRS in the chat. No doubt there'll be updated stuff with particularly some of the videos that have come out of the conference. Next week, Martin, who have we got?
We have Richard Grinham, who have now entered in. He's working in London now, so he's visiting our next week. Guys, I love to talk about this subject. This was just...
I'm in Portugal next week, live.
You Portugal. Are, so I will be the one running it. But I have...
with new teeth.
Yeah, probably, hopefully. What I think is interesting, and thank you guys for coming in today, because this was super relevant. This is about very practical. How do you move from all these thoughts down to executing it, down to making customer smooth journey? This is about your financial situation also, because when you get this right, you will succeed more as a company if you get it right. So with that said, I'm looking forward to next Friday again. Sorry for a little bit technical challenges, but that's LinkedIn Live. How can you say otherwise? Love you that you participated today. Have a nice weekend. See you next Friday with Richard Grinham from London. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks very much.
Appreciate it.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.